Good morning, afternoon, and evening. I'm Callista Kirk, and welcome to the Carrying the Banner podcast, where we discuss the variety of ways that musicals can be used to educate and raise awareness throughout the community. Let's jump right in. Today we will be discussing how mental health is addressed and represented in musicals with admirable grace and respect. Two musicals that depict mental health with this necessary realness are Dear Evan Hansen by Benj Pasek and Justin Paul, and Next to Normal by Brian Yorkey. I figured we'd only discuss two musicals today, seeing as the topic is quite heavy and sensitive to certain listeners. But anyway, as always, there will be a link to highlights from these two musicals in the description. We'll start it off with Dear Evan Hansen. Dear Evan Hansen opened on Broadway in 2016 with a production nominated for 9 Tonys, 3 Drama Leagues, a Grammy, and an Emmy. The acclaim led to multiple North American tours and openings, as well as the novelization of the plot being adapted into a young adult fiction book. As a warning, the musical does have some explicit language, though not excessive. It also includes frequent talk of anxiety, depression, self-harm, and more. These concepts demand your attention, seeing as they are central points for the plot, so if extensive mention of these topics could negatively affect you, I generally advise you to steer clear of the deep dive of this musical. All this said, it is extremely courteous of the topics as they are performed passionately and realistically by the cast and produced by the crew. The plot is as follows. Evan Hansen is starting to apply for colleges and scholarships in a single-mother household and struggling with extreme social anxiety and depression. As a part of his therapy, he is assigned to write letters to himself addressed, Dear Evan Hansen, today is going to be a good day and here's why. So, when another student picks up the letter from the school printer and takes his own life later that day with the note still on his body, the family of the student and his peers take it as the student, Connor's, suicide note addressed to Evan. Partially because of Evan's fragmented mental state, he finds himself unable to refute these rumors and proceeds to create a story about his and Connor's friendship that gives false hope to the student body and to Connor's family. This probably sounds a little confusing, and it's because I'm not explaining it too well, not because it's actually confusing. When you listen to it or when you actually see it, it's definitely clear what is going on. As you would expect, the situation gets out of control quickly, and Evan's mental health spirals uncontrollably, trying to hold together the pieces of the reality that he has crafted. Initially, it's for the sake of Connor's family, but it also transforms as a sense of security within his own life. In this spiraling, the cast sings songs about a variety of facets of mental health, such as how humans deal with grief, feeling isolated and alone, motherly love, and the glorification of the dead. They perform with grace and overwhelming beauty. In the Act 1 closing number, You Will Be Found, Evan is meant to read a eulogy for Connor in front of his classmates. He starts robotically reciting off index cards before giving up and beginning to say what's on his mind. He changes his speech to one of celebrating the fact that even when the dark comes crashing through, you will be found. This beacon of hope that Evan is shining for his classmates also illuminates his own longing desires. The number is a testament to anyone who has ever or is currently feeling isolated or helpless. It is choreographed with lighting and staging that is powerful in getting the point across to every single audience member. As long as you do not have any problems with the sensitive topics in Dear Evan Hansen, I truly believe that this musical is beneficial to everyone who watches or listens to it. Regardless of whether you have been diagnosed with a mental illness or not, there is a good chance that you experience some kind of anxiousness or loneliness, and this musical displays these symptoms and struggles realistically and powerfully, and the way that it affects family and friends, as well as the person experiencing the issues. If you want to catch a showing of Dear Evan Hansen live, you will have to go to its place on Broadway, in Toronto, or on one of the US tour stops. There's also a production in Australia being created as of March of 2019. As for listening to the Grammy-winning cast album, you can find it on Spotify, YouTube, or iTunes for your listening pleasure. That's about all you need to know about Dear Evan Hansen. Moving on to Next to Normal. Next to Normal first debuted on Broadway in 2009 at the Booth Theater. The production went on to be nominated for 11 Tony Awards and the 2010 Pulitzer Prize for Drama, which it actually won, making it only the 8th musical in history to win the award. A 2010 U.S. tour embarked after its massed critical acclaim, and the tour ended the following year. As a precaution, the musical, along with its decently consistent use of explicit language, discusses mental health, shock therapy, and self-harm at length. I think the way that the production portrays this is respectful to the honest truth of the mental illness, and I think it is important to the effectiveness of the narrative. Regardless of what I think, if you believe that hearing me discuss these topics will not be beneficial to your well-being, I advise you to steer clear of my analysis of the Next to Normal plot. Otherwise, here we go. Next to Normal follows a middle-aged mother, Diana Goodman, and her experience with deteriorating mental health and the way it affects her personal well-being, as well as that of her daughter and husband. Diana, as of 16 years ago, has been diagnosed with both depression and bipolar disorder, and the events to follow include her attempts at therapy, medication, electroconvulsive shock therapy, and more. This results in an attempt at self-harm, significant memory loss, and numerous outbursts of violence. Consequently, Natalie, Diana's daughter, undergoes her own struggles. Initially, she uses piano playing and music to cope with her problems at home, but as her mother's mental state worsens, she unhealthily pushes music out of her life with the use of drugs and other destructive behavior. Natalie is contrasted with her father when it comes to the two extremes of how people cope with family members that are ill. She represents the side that wants to blame the sick person for negligence and abuse, though their actions and words are not totally under their control. Natalie's father and Diana's husband, Dan, manages his and Diana's relationship in a vastly different way. Dan throws his own interests and his own mental health out the window and sacrifices himself for the sake of his wife's safety and health. Dan goes to all of Natalie's recitals, communicates with the doctors and therapists about future treatment options, and suppresses his own depressive and invasive thoughts for the sake of Diana's success. Furthermore, when Diana faces significant memory loss, he tries to manipulate her remembering process and shield her from the harsh truths that partially caused her declining mental state. I will not spoil these things, but it shows his willingness to put honesty on the line for his wife's preservation of innocence. In the song I Am the One, Diana is unable to recognize which is the hand reaching out to save her and which is the hand trying to pull her deeper into herself and into her pain. It is depicted through the alternating voices of Dan, her husband, who's trying to prove that he is here to help and heal her with his unconditional love, switching to the physical representation of the voice in the back of Diana's head, who repeats his lyrics with a negative connotation as to prove that everything that Dan is saying is insensitive to her struggles. The trio end the song singing together, signifying the battle that Diana is undergoing and how it will not end as simply as everyone hopes. This musical is applicable to anyone that has or is currently going through a low period of mental health, and anyone that knows someone that has or is currently going through it. It depicts the hardship of mental health in a fullness that is both chilling and hopeful because of how it allows for conversations about mental health to be put at center stage, as opposed to typical forms of media that seem to hush talk of this topic for the sake of their own optimism and mindset. Next to Normal argues that keeping these issues in the shadows is not the way to solve any of the problems and is damaging to those that are coping with these problems. There are currently no productions of Next to Normal, either touring or at a stationary theater, but the original 2008 Broadway cast recording is on Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube. It is a heavy musical, and I suggest listening to it all the way through, because it gives the full picture. The humor and purely entertaining scenes coexist with the sadness and darker parts in harmony. Not only that, but it is a rock musical, so it's pretty cool and pretty fun to listen to. And with that, episode 4 of the Carrying the Banner podcast is in the books. Once again, I'm Callista Kirk. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next episode, episode 5, where we will be discussing a selection of musicals that deal with race relations and racial gentrification. See you then. This episode was written and recorded by me, Callista Kirk, and produced by Steve Baldwin and myself. It is part of the Figure 8 podcast network. That's Figure with an 8, so you can find us there. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at PodcastCTB, on Instagram at Carrying the Banner Pod, or on Facebook by searching Carrying the Banner Podcast. We are happy to hear your feedback, and that is also where the episode playlist will be linked for you with a highlight reel from each musical mentioned in the episode. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.